The Opinion with Michael J. Today, the topic is the art of propaganda. How lies shape our reality. What? Yes, how lies shape our reality. Driving deep into the world of propaganda, examining how outlets like Fox News with this guy here, Agent Orange, Sun News, National Post in Canada, and then surprisingly enough, where you really don't understand where it's strong, we're going to discuss the social media aspect and how that is being manipulated. It's deep. You thought the deep state was bad? Deep state really wasn't all that bad. Those civil workers were actually doing an honest job. But you took Doge to come up with all sorts of bullshit and misinformation, allow planes to friggin' run into helicopters and helicopters run into planes. But, hey, what's a human life, eh? Right? So, understand Sun News, National Post, manipulates narratives and disseminates misinformation with an eye on the current political climate. So, what I've been doing during this whole election cycle, unraveling the insidious tactics used by conservative media and social conservative media to deflect accountability and maintain a loyal base. That's all they do. No accountability, just to satisfy the loyal base, get the troops fired up. So, this is drawing parallels to historic propaganda efforts, and you see it around the world. You know, 9 in 10 people aged 34 and younger are regular social media users. And then 7 to 10 actually aged 50 to 64. And 5 in 10, 65 and older. I did a video and I included a Van Jones video. He had 3 people from South Carolina. And there were Democrats, which would be Liberal in Canada, or NDP in Canada. But they went to social media, followed people like Candace Owens, and then X, which used to be Twitter, TikTok, and that opened their eyes to a new world, and they found out all sorts of things going on. And they went hard Republican. Doesn't matter if the world's falling, stock market's crashing, no more cargo ships are bringing goods in from China. Cost of groceries in the U.S. is going way up. Canada's being hit by tariffs. Everybody's been hit by tariffs. No matter, but this is the way it is. So here you go. This is propaganda of the highest. Reminds me of Snake Plissken. Do you remember Snake Plissken? Back to New York, 1981. Then back to L.A. in 1996, 1998. Well, here you go. This is taken right out of Snake Plissken. Take it away.
Introduce him now to say a few words. Mr. Prime Minister, please take it away.
Thank you, Mr. President, Donald. And this is a really fantastic, historic day in which we can announce this deal between our two great countries. And I think it's a real tribute to...
What you have to understand about this deal is the UK is in a trade surplus with the United States. No trade deficit. They're in a trade surplus. And they're about number 8 or 9 on the trade scale with the United States.
The history that we have of working so closely together. Can I pay tribute, Donald, to your negotiating team as well, particularly yes. Howard and Jameson, who've done an incredible job, a very professional job, and my team as well. 2 negotiating teams have worked at pace now for a number of weeks to bring in this deal today. Really important deal. This is going to boost trade between and across our countries. It's going to not only protect jobs but create jobs opening market access. And as you say, Donald, the timing couldn't be more apt, because not only was it 80 years ago today that victory came for Europe after and at the end of the Second World War, but of course on that day the UK and the US stood together as the closest of allies. And Donald, I think even down to the hour, because you may or may not know,
Damn, they went stereo on us.
About this time of day, exactly 80 years ago, that Winston Churchill announced victory in Europe, and that led to great celebrations across Europe, across America, but particularly in the United Kingdom. Literally people going out into the street, putting bunting up, going up to the palace. And so to be able to announce this great deal on the same day.
But here's the deal. Donald needs a deal. Doesn't matter how bad it is. He just needs it to save face. Just like the Chinese. Once you understand how to deal with the Chinese and their need to save face, it helps you greatly in understanding and how to deal with them in any negotiation. Wonderful people to deal with, but just like anybody, they're out to take care of their people. Simple as that. Simple as that, you say? Yeah, simple as that. Okay. So where are we going to go now? Well, we're going to go here. Fascism isn't coming, it's here. And this is really the root cause of everything. People are getting their information from social media. They're buying into a false narrative, fiction instead of fact.
Democracy depends on a free press. Please support our independent journalism at democracynow.org/give. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh.
We're continuing our conversation with Mahdi Hassan, who is marking the first anniversary of his new site, Zeteo, which he formed after leaving MSNBC. Mahdi, you've closely covered the war in Gaza as well as the Trump administration. So if you could begin on Gaza.
On where we are right now? Mm-hmm. I mean, some of us tried to say that Donald Trump would make things even worse. There was a big debate during the election campaign where people understandably said, it can't get any worse. And the one thing we know about US politics is it can always get worse. And I think we've seen that with the Trump administration. He came in with this great fanfare. He had the fake ceasefire around the time of his inauguration. He got a bit of credit from some folks. We always knew it was never going to last. Netanyahu ended that ceasefire. They're now killing people at rates even worse in many ways in 2024. You guys began the show talking about 100 people killed in 24 hours. And the world is numb to that. You know, in October, November, December of 2023, it was a huge story. And today, people are shrugging their shoulders. We're talking about ethnic cleansing of Gaza, relocating the entire population.
It's like COVID in the United States during Trump's term. You got to remember, September 1, 2001, the Twin Towers going down. About 3,000 people died. During COVID, towards the end of Trump's tenure as president, they're losing 3,000 people a day and nobody's batting an eye. That's just to put things in perspective.
The Israeli government said this week that they will flatten everything that remains in Gaza. Netanyahu was quoted in cabinet saying that we don't want to die with the Palestinians, we want them to die alone, was Netanyahu's phrase to his own cabinet ministers. And of course, Donald Trump himself has signed off on all of this. We're now having a mass starvation campaign. During the Biden administration, it was bad enough saying, are we going to get 100 trucks in, 200 trucks in? 0 trucks have gone into Gaza since March the 2nd.
You talk about the personalizing Palestinians. In the United States, where the media manufactures consent, can you talk about the icing out of Palestinian voices? I mean, the fact that you're no longer at MSNBC, that you were forced out of MSNBC after this incredible confrontation you had, questioning you had, interview with an Israeli spokesperson, and your ongoing coverage of bringing those voices out.
So one thing I did at MSNBC, I was at MSNBC for 3.5 years, and one thing, some of my colleagues, we had Ayman Mohyeldin at the premiere of the film last night, who still has a show at MSNBC, although he shares it now with 3 other hosts. But one thing we did, and one thing Joy Reid, who's also left the network recently, had her show cancelled.
Forced out of the network.
And Ali Velshi, who's still at the network, thankfully, another great correspondent. Something that some of us did was to try and platform Palestinian voices. One of the problems we have, as you say, is they are iced out. Americans don't hear from Palestinians or Arabs or Muslims or people with actual expertise of the region or people who have spent time in Jenin, in the occupied West Bank, in Gaza. And that is a fundamental problem. You're getting a very one-sided view of the conflict. What's ironic, Amy, is the recent Pew poll that came out showed the American public is actually, for the first time, more sympathetic.
Just friggin' rubble everywhere. This on the left, a building standing. That's pretty rare. You would be surprised how everything is just pretty much leveled. Nothing but rubble everywhere, as far as the eye can see for most parts.
Less sympathetic to Israel, much more critical. I think it was 52%, I can't remember the exact number, but a majority of Americans were critical of Israel or not supportive of Israel for the first time. And I looked at that number and I thought, wow, a majority of Americans, a slim majority, that's despite the media coverage in favor of Israel. Imagine if Americans actually got fair coverage of this conflict and actually heard from Palestinians. Those numbers would be even higher. And I think the real tragedy is that the media has been complicit in the Gaza genocide. I'll give you one example. Over the last few weeks, Palestinians have been starved in Gaza by the Israelis, and according to one study, not a single Sunday show in this country has mentioned it.
Mehdi, I just want to ask you what we reported also in headlines, that Reuters exclusive, U.S.-Israel discuss possible U.S.-led administration for Gaza. Sources say they spoke to 5 people who corroborated reports that the U.S. and Israel are discussing the U.S. potentially leading a temporary post-war administration of Gaza. Your response?
Kill me now is my response.
See how
Kill
that
me
went
now.
in Iraq.
We live in an episode of idiocracy. The American government sat around, forget Donald Trump, man's an idiot, ignoramus, couldn't find Gaza on a map. But people in his administration, qualified people, sat around the table and said, what should we do about Gaza, the biggest problem in the world today, geopolitical issue? Let's do what we did in Iraq. Right, the Iraq, for those people who are watching who are not old enough to remember 2003, 4, 5, I've interviewed Paul Bremer. The Bush administration sent a viceroy, sent Paul Bremer to run the country with a bunch of kids. Some of them were out, some of them had only, there was one guy who went out to the Greens, and I famously remember, who had only run an ice cream truck in college. They sent a bunch of children and Paul Bremer to run Iraq like a colonial project. It was an absolute disaster. It increased sectarian tensions. It increased violence. It divided the country. It fomented more violent resistance. The idea that the people of Gaza, who have resisted Israeli occupation for decades, are now going to say, well, we only had an issue with Israeli occupation. We're fine with a U.S. occupation. This is absurd. Some of us warned since October the 7th that if you really care about stopping Hamas, why are you creating the conditions for Hamas 2.0? And this is going to be Hamas 3.0, Hamas on steroids, if you create a situation where the American government, American military is on the ground in Gaza trying to control the population.
I mean, don't we have an idea? What did Trump tweet out that the video, the 30-second video of
with a gold statue of
Elon
Trump
Musk, a gold statue of Trump, and then Trump and Netanyahu on the beach.
He loves his AI videos of himself. It's an insane video. We all just moved on for it because there's so much happening in the news, but I'm glad you reminded that. Look, he's been consistently clear on one thing: ethnic cleansing, relocation of Palestinians, creating Gaza the Riviera. He's obsessed with the beachfront property because he's a real estate guy / war criminal endorser.
A federal appeals court on Wednesday ordered the Trump administration to transfer the abducted Tufts Fulbright scholar, international student Rumeysa Ozturk from Louisiana back to Vermont, where her case could be heard. You just interviewed the Massachusetts Congresswoman Breonna Presley about her treatment.
Horrific treatment. We're not just detaining foreign students in this country for speech crimes, Amy. We're torturing them too. If you listen to what happened to Badr Khan Suri, who's a Georgetown student who was also detained, the torture that he's gone through, the abuse, the sleeping on the floor, the denial of clean underwear, and now Rumeysa Ozturk. Ayanna Pressley, Congresswoman, told me that when she went to see her, she was denied health care. She suffered severe asthma attacks. She had her hijab removed without consent. I mean, Louisiana, that detention center in Louisiana is famous for human human rights crimes. So why are people being sent from Vermont and Massachusetts and New York, Mahmoud Khalil, to Louisiana? That in itself is a question we should ask ourselves. We're torturing people again.
So, Mehdi, in that same
crimes.
interview, Ayanna Pressley said to you, this is not about the Trump administration. This is not about weathering the next 4 years. I believe this will dictate the next 100. We have 30 seconds. Your response to that?
I think she's right in many ways. I think we are in that historical period now. This is not just about Trump. You look at the global rise of fascism and authoritarianism. You look at what's happening with Narendra Modi in India and Orban in Hungary, Putin in Russia and Ukraine, Middle East autocrats. We are in that place where a democracy, the progress we made over the last 80 years, 100 years, is at stake, very much so.
And a judge just stopped immigrants from being sent to Libya on a U.S. military jet. And over 80 students were just arrested at Columbia. And Rubio said he'd pull international visas of students who were protesting. Your final thoughts in 5 seconds.
Fascism isn't coming, Amy, it's here.
Mehdi Hasan, the editor-in-chief of...
And that's the way it is, folks. Don't take it lightly. You've seen it in this last election, and you see it now in the propaganda that's being put out by right-wing YouTubers. Just to flare up the base. Flare up the base, you say. Yipperdoodles. Flare up the base. The art of propaganda. What are you going to do, folks? Now here, art of propaganda, Malcolm Nance. He was intelligence for the Navy a long time ago, and recently, he's an older guy, but recently he went to fight and help in Ukraine. So is Zelensky the Snake Plissken of the world? That's the question.
Spy. Hi, this is Malcolm Nance, and welcome to Black Man Spy. This week is going to be very interesting because, as you know, we deal in the world of the dark arts, espionage, intelligence, and we're going to touch on propaganda and
I want to say one other thing based on the last video. In Serbia, they've got lots of protests going on for a while. The president there is a Russian puppet. Been there for a while, a lot of unrest. But you have to understand, he's trying to set up a big property development in prime areas for Jared Kushner and Donald Trump Jr. You had Romania, where it's had problems for a few years now, and another Russian puppet. Amazing how Putin keeps coming up, eh? Mr. Putin keeps coming up, and guess what? He's there in the White House. Agent Orange, Donald J. Trump. So if you really think you're going to get a straight deal from Trump, be careful. You got to be very, very careful. Trust me on that.
in a way that most Americans don't really realize how propaganda is being delivered. In the old days, the Soviets would have these entire machines churning out lie after lie after lie and trying to get it into some remote Indian newspaper and hope that it would be picked up by the Associated Press, and then that lie would be propagated throughout the world. But most people saw it, especially when they saw.
And the other thing, Northern Perspective, another right-wing, I hate this right-wing and left-wing crap. Another conservative-leaning hardliners on YouTube, apparently TASS, T-A-S-S, approached them to do work. They pay them to do work. And this guy just went on the record the last couple of days about this. We can't be bought. Well, guess what, buddy? I've been dealing with this bullshit since 1992. You're talking about it in 2025. You've got no clue what's really going on. And then you quote the United States National Intelligence Service. Meanwhile, TASS was right in a press White House. Zelensky's there. TASS is there. You know, you guys got to get it together. Really no clue what's going on.
saw Soviet television,
You're being played.
or read the newspaper, Pravda News, or Itar-TASS press agency. Anything that came out of them was a lie, and we knew that was a lie. Not the way it works in the world today. In the United States, we have our own propaganda organs and organizations. And, you know, that's in addition to the way it's being disseminated. Now, anybody with a computer has the ability to have all the same power to get their lie or perspective out, or propaganda, carefully crafted propaganda.
You see that? All it takes is a YouTube account, and you see it with Juno News, Moose on the Loose, Elevate Podcast. Who's that other guy? Ezra Levant, Rebel News. Rebel News caused such a disruption at the delegates for Prime Minister meetings in Montreal that they had to cancel the last scrum and ask stupid questions about, like, Trudeau. Like, Trudeau wasn't going for Prime Minister. Like, it's just a dumb question. Waste of time.
Propaganda out with bigger distribution, thanks to the internet and social media, than the New York Times ever had. One of the biggest propaganda arms, which has been found legally liable for lying on television, for creating truths, half-truths, lies, and disinformation, is, of course, Fox News. The creation of Roger Ailes, who, after the Watergate resignation of Richard Nixon, really wanted to create a machine so that Richard Nixon would get off. And we've seen Fox News and their other right-wing outlets, One American News Network, Newsmax, and other outlets around the world synchronize themselves to where truth, half-truth, lies, and propaganda are all furthering an objective to reach that objective. One of the problems is there is so much social media activity, so many lies and propaganda being disseminated today, it's impossible to monitor. If when I wrote my book, Plot to Hack America, and I said that the Russians, in creating the Internet Research Agency, would have to have 300 or 400 English language specialists monitoring social media, monitoring cable news in real time to get the flow of what Donald Trump and the right-wing world and MAGA world was saying, so that they could craft propaganda.
But here's the deal, folks. It's happening right now in Maple Mega North. And you got these YouTubers like Juno News, Moose on the Loose, Elevate Podcast, Northern Perspective, et al. And between those, just those there, that's at least 500,000 subscribers. To the power of 10, then that's 5 million people. You got 40 million people in Canada. And they're influencing using half-truths, misleading people, and creating false narratives, misinformation, and it's dangerous, and people buy into it.
And lies that would amplify that, then take what they were saying and repitch it so that it would go around the world.
Oh, and the other one, Jasmine Lane. Her show's called Overly Opinionated. You can't get more overly opinionated than her.
I was wrong. They had over 1,200 full-time linguists, English language experts, monitoring our news media. The problem with this is that we give foreign powers the ability to leverage our free speech and turn it into a weapon. So that, as Mark Twain said, before the truth could get out of bed and put its shoes on, its trousers on, a lie has gone around the world 3 times. And that's where we are.
And that's the truth, and I've experienced it, and I've lived it in real life. I know the guy that was dealing with, what's the guy's name in Russia? Boris Yeltsin. Undermining Mr. Gorbachev. Taking the disarmament and funds to move the nuclear armaments out of Ukraine. That Bill Clinton paid in 1994. IMF funds to help Russia. They robbed them all. Gorbachev looked good to the West, but to Russia, he was despised because they were suffering. poverty. Because Yeltsin et al. Were creating a new system of oligarchs. They put Putin in place. And this is what you have right now. Agent Orange Trump was brought into the fold. He profited greatly, laundering money also for the Colombian drug cartels, Mexican drug cartels. All those armaments that went out of the former USSR got sold in the black market. Everybody profited. The guy I know, married to his daughter, believe it or not, actually used to be the government that controlled a certain part of an area. Biggest city in Canada. Going back to the days of Lord Simcoe. You really do not know what's going on. But anyways, he was laundering 76 billion Canadian dollars a month. 10 years ago, 76 billion was worth more than the GDP of Ontario. So, just to put things in perspective. Malcolm, take it away, buddy.
Today. But now we have multi-billion-dollar platforms. And as we saw at the end of the 2024 election, good people of good faith, just started turning off the television. They didn't want to monitor the craziness out there that was coming from Trump, the MAGA machine, in the right-wing world anymore. And they stopped watching progressive left-wing channels because they were starting to bend at the knee, so to speak. But there is one person who is not doing that. He is actually carrying out a job that we would see in the U.S. intelligence community. We would have teams of people on. This one individual is monitoring Fox News, right-wing world, MAGA world speeches so that we don't have to. And that's Aaron Rupar, our special guest for today. So enjoy this interview. He's a great guy. And believe me, I'm not going to watch that stuff, but he watches it so we don't have to. Welcome to another thrilling adventure of Black Man Spy podcast. And today I have an extra special treat for you because we have someone who has nothing to do with espionage, but everything to do with espionage.
Propaganda.
And that's Aaron Rupar. I'm going to read his bio here, so don't watch my eyes. Eric is...
Yes, this is what people don't realize. The demographics of the Russian people, Putin knows exactly how to manipulate them. They took the same model and used it on the Midwest of the United States, and it worked there. I witnessed it because once you know what's going on, you see the patterns, you understand what's going on. And the same thing has happened here in Canada, and people just don't get it.
Is a reporter, commentator, author of Public Notice
Question
newsletter.
Everything.
Formerly at Vox, he established himself as one of the foremost chroniclers of Trumpism. That is very true. Explaining what's happening on the American right for a largely progressive audience or any audience with common sense. He immerses himself with right-wing media and watches Trump rallies so you don't have to. Aaron, welcome to Black Man Spy. I really am fanboy gushing here over you because...
Thanks. Yeah. No, I appreciate it, Malcolm. You're in a group of a few dozen people who I've interacted with a lot on Twitter over the years, but never actually met in any way, shape, or form. So it's great to see you, and thank you for having me on the show.
But the reason that I'm gushing is because it's sort of like this is why I say you on this show where we usually have boatloads of spies and ex-spies and intelligence people. You're sort of doing what we do when I was at the National Security Agency, right? We monitor things no one ever wants to monitor, right? All of these situations, people's videos, communications, whatever, that are just horrible. And in giant pantheon of influencers, if you've ever seen the balls and bubbles of influencers, it's all red, right? Elon Musk and, you have all these right-wing characters. And you're practically the only blue bubble there, along with Midas Touch, in that entire pantheon. And just, explain to me, one, why you decided to make yourself so effing crazy by monitoring. You monitor everything. Then you take clips of it that we need to know about. So I rely on your stuff religiously, right? You are, as we call it in the intelligence community, you are the read board of right-wing world, because I'm not going to watch that. Why do you do it, man?
Yeah, initially it was just because there was kind of a market opportunity for it. I started doing the clipping stuff back in 2017, and at that time, of course, Trump was president, and so right away I was already kind of covering his rallies and like the White House press briefings and big congressional hearings. At that time, I was at Think Progress before I went to Vox. Right. But then, we ended up as a newsroom at Think Progress getting Snapstream, which is the service I mostly use in addition to a couple others to clip. And it took off right away because there weren't too many people doing that at the time. And so, it's obviously evolved over the years from there. But, initially I came into this as like a traditional reporter and editor. Mm-hmm. And the video stuff was like a total accident that I stumbled into. But as soon as I started posting clips on Twitter, mm-hmm. It was clear to me that there was a huge appetite, and that there's potential to really, build a big audience doing the work that I do. So, yeah, I kind of stumbled into it, but, I really appreciate all the, the kind words you had to say. And, whenever I get feedback like that, it is gratifying because, as you kind of alluded to, it's not the easiest work psychologically to put yourself through, especially with Trump, in power now. The election last November was kind of a blow in that respect because, I think we all kind of hoped that we were turning the page once and for all. But, it's kind of right back to some of the same mentality and
See, I want to make it clear. I got targeted because what I knew about the Panama Papers, Trump, Putin, David Cameron lost his PM. It's all tied in. Panama Papers, Pandora Papers, and Paradise Papers in the UK. That's why David Cameron had to leave. I got targeted because of that. Cost me a lot of money. But I'm alive and well.
Kind of vibes that I had in 2017 covering this stuff. And, someone has to do it. It's important, I think, that news gets out there about what the administration is doing and what Republicans are up to. And so, I think that's kind of where I come in, trying to decode that stuff and share it for my audience, which obviously is mostly left of center.
Yeah. Well, I was a contributor at MSNBC for, almost 7 years. And I was on air all the time, right? Whether I started out in counterterrorism and doing terrorism stuff, then I'm
going to add some more clips of this stuff later. We're going to pivot to another, not later this session, because I'm going to tie off this session very soon. I've had it's just too much stuff. It's rather unfortunate. It's just friggin' mind-boggling. The stuff here. It's mind-boggling. Okay, so now we're going to go to Elevate Podcast. Now I'm just coming in. It's a 13-plus minute clip. I'm in at 4:09 right now. Take it away.
Hey, Donald Trump, my friend, the man you put all your money on, is not fighting Donald Trump. I hate to admit it.
See, this is how they operate. This is how they manipulate their base. This is all this is doing. This is what I'm trying to point out to you. You're going to see right now manipulation of their base. Misinformation, half-truths, etc., etc.
Tell you, that's what happened. And Danielle Smith got word of this, and she was asked her response. Doug Ford's comments.
Well, Doug and I have a great friendship. We don't agree on everything. In fact, I think we supported different people in the last federal election. And so we don't have to agree on everything. But what I will say is we have a constructive conversation at the coffee table. I continue to look forward to having a constructive conversation with him at the coffee table. But he's the Premier of Ontario. I'm the Premier of Alberta. We just have different issues that we have to respond to in our respective jurisdictions. I don't tell him how he should run his province, and I would hope that he doesn't tell me how I should run mine. But we have a very respectful relationship, and I hope that continues. As most Albertans know, I have repeatedly stated I do not support Alberta separating from Canada. I personally still have hope that there is a path.
Now, she says she personally doesn't support the separation. And as I've proven, that's a false narrative.
Forward for a strong and sovereign Alberta within a united Canada.
Okay, so there you go. a sovereign Alberta within a united Canada?
So I am going to do everything within my power to negotiate a fair deal for Alberta with the new Prime Minister. My party quite clearly in their founding documents came together and they support a strong, united Canada, protecting constitutional sovereignty, and that's what I've been doing.
Yeah, but here's the question. Nobody asked this guy. What constitutional sovereignty are you talking about? Canada, federally, or Alberta? Because the Alberta Sovereignty Act, you put together, you got elected October 8, 2022. You passed, after a first reading, you passed on December 8, 2022. The Alberta Sovereignty in United Canada Act. Like, come on now. You've been separating, separatists. You're as bad as LeBlanc. Bad as LeBlanc. Maybe even worse. Because you're pushing it hard. Even during a crisis when we need to unite, you're pushing it hard.
A citizen-initiated referenda would be, by definition, initiated by citizens. And so
So the first question was, what constitutional sovereignty are you talking about? Federally Canada united or Alberta sovereignty separate? Meanwhile, you put a referendum out there for separation. Was that a day after the election was over? So April 29, you had it on the table? Your caucus? You state your caucus and your party is 100% behind Alberta's sovereignty? And you're just, so you're talking double speak. But the question is, if pipelines are so important, why haven't you spoken to Scott Moe and Brian Eby in British Columbia and try to work out an agreement to get pipelines going to the West Coast? But instead you're focusing on separatist movements and woe be me blaming the feds for everything that's happened to Alberta over the past 10 years. That's what you claim. It's been 10 years. And then the leader of the Conservative Party lost his riding of 20 years by over 4,300 votes, is now in Alberta in a by-election. Liberals said, fine, by-election, no problem, we're not going to stand in your way. Where Preston Manning is, he wants to separate. So, this is what's going on.
won't prejudge what issues citizens might want to put on the table, but that is up to citizens to decide and to get the number of signatures. All I've said is I will honor the process. I think if an election were held today, it would get about 30% support. So that's why I want to make sure that those numbers do not get higher and those numbers end up going lower because we're successful in negotiating.
What a diplomatic response. Doug Ford is, quite frankly, a fool. And he's made himself look like that time and time and time again. And there he is again. People talking about separate. No, we got to come together. And the way he keeps throwing darts and has thrown darts at Polyev, has thrown darts at Daniel Smith at times, making her look like a villain through this whole process. And here she is yet again, taking it with such poise, such grace. Like, yeah, we have a good relation.
You mean separatist doublespeak? Is that poise? Is that grace? You're undermining unity in Canada without compunction, and you are promoting it there, Josh. Elevate Podcast. He's not the only one.
You know, I'd hope he'd actually mind his own business and not
Mind
talk
his
about
own
me.
business.
Talk about our business here in Alberta. As we would not talk about Ontario's
got
business, and I hope
119,000
he'd
followers.
Respect that, and does so in such a polite way, killing him with kindness, but telling him what's up. And it was interesting to hear her say, like, I don't support a referendum on separation. However, I will honor the process. That's the difference between a leader and someone who's just going to tell you what's up.
I call bullshit on that because she put the referendum out there. It wasn't even out there on it till April 29 when her and her caucus put it out there. It wasn't available. And then they claim, oh, we used similar pattern that California used. California uses 8% of the population. Meanwhile, California's got friggin' 39 million people. And at 8%, you know, that works out to a high bar. Almost 37 million people you got to get onto a referendum. Meanwhile, Alberta, what do you got, 4.7 or 4.9 million people? She put it at 5%. How many people does it take to get 5% there? Like, you're playing with numbers, you're playing with people's lives, you're playing with the unity of Canada, and all this girl needs to do, talk to her next-door neighbor, Scott Moe, his next-door neighbor, Brian Eby. What can we do for pipelines going out? Work with the indigenous people instead of the separation nonsense. And a 12% wine tax. Like, we need to get rid of the barriers between interprovincial, so we can have interprovincial trade without barriers that'll make up for the tariffs. That's number one. And you don't get it, Josh. You're just trying to make out this girl into some sort of goddess. That's a false narrative. Maybe you believe it. I don't know.
And the government getting involved with your life. She's open about how she wants to make sure that's the last thing that happens. But if that's what the people want, she'll honor that. And this is the sentiment that's been going on. The sentiment that's been building between the East and the West for far too long. The East has been spitting on the West, telling them they're not good enough. Hey, you're just good enough for your oil. And even so, going as far as putting caps on their oil now. Putting caps on their energy. Thinking that's a good thing to do. And Alberta's, quite frankly, had enough. And that's why we are at the point that we are currently at. And that's why it's really frustrating to see.
You're on the East Coast. You're not even in Alberta, number one. Number two is bitumen, dirty oil. But the fact of the matter, the cheapest way you can get it out of the ground costs $57 US per barrel. Meanwhile, today, West crude, which is similar that, you know, it's used to be refined in the U.S., $59 a barrel. When it was $25 a barrel, it wasn't profitable. You couldn't do it with the oil sands because of how it needs to be taken out of the ground. And the cheapest way to do it is with steam at $57 US a barrel. You mine it, it's going up to over $80 US a barrel. Well, let's deal with facts.
Again, someone from the East saying, we can't talk about separation now. We got to come together to fight Trump's tariffs. And then that moment, Carney goes down, elbows down. Not a whole lot of fighting on Trump's tariffs happened then, did it? And then you're going to go ahead and villainize Daniel Smith in Alberta for listening to the people and what their grievances are. It's something that Mr. Doug Ford could learn something from, because I know he's been getting his play-by-play from the likes of Justin Trudeau. The play-by-play.
Holy moly. This guy. The false narratives. Well, let's see what Scott Moe says. Next door, Regina, Saskatchewan, May 7th. The day after the meeting with Trump by Mr. Carney, and he spoke to Mr. Carney.
It was a good call. We got a debrief with respect to the meeting that Prime Minister Carney had with President Trump, of which it appeared, as we had mentioned yesterday, it went pretty good. And I think it went as good as it could be expected. We seem to be on a little bit more positive relationship path. That is what I was hoping for coming out of this meeting. And credit to Prime Minister Carney. And now he should have the opportunity, I think, to meet again when we get to the G7 in Banff, when we find our way into June. And we'll continue as subnational leaders to, educate and advocate on behalf of the industries that matter to the constituents for us in Saskatchewan, but to other premiers in other parts of Canada. So I think a positive meeting, and I thank him for the debrief today, and I think it went really well.
Does that give you hope for the relationship with the U.S. going forward and maybe something being done about tariffs?
Yeah, I've always had hope with respect to the relationship with the U.S., and I've always felt that we were going to find a path through this, as bumpy as that might be in the, in the meantime, so to speak. And I would continue to say that not only do I have hope that that relationship will be preserved, but I think it may be improved on as we ensure that we grow the North American economy, North American energy dominance, North American opportunities, and keep our North American economy as competitive as possible relative to some other continental economies around the world that are the actual competitors.
How do you think premiers are feeling across the board after this phone call? What's the general feeling like?
I think fairly positive. I think there's an acknowledgement that there's still some road to travel with our relationship with President Trump and his administration, and there'll be some tough conversations to be had. I think, in fairness, I think there's also an understanding that there's some road for us to travel as Canadians, for us to come back and truly be unified, and that might look a little bit different in various parts of the country versus other parts. And so I think there's an acknowledgement that there's some hard work ahead of us.
June 2nd meeting in Saskatoon. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I'd invited the Prime Minister to Saskatchewan. He'd offered maybe we should host the First Minister's meeting there, and I said that would be great. Consider it done. And so we're planning in early June to host all of the premiers and the Prime Minister in Saskatoon. Look forward to it. It'll be a good discussion in the lead up to the G7 meetings in Banff. It'll be good ongoing discussion with respect to our relationship not only with the U.S. but also China. And I think in the meantime, and even after that, some good discussion on how we can really bring Canadians together in light of a fairly divisive election and a fairly divisive time.
Western alienation, would that sort of be a bit of the focus of that meeting, trying to do something about it?
Yeah, I think it'd be, to some degree, part of the discussion from Saskatchewan's perspective in every interaction we have with the new Prime Minister and the existing government. But I would hope it is, point by point, we're able to actually work on it in the meantime. In some of the work that we're doing, and I think we can provide some relevant advice for some policy direction change for the Prime Minister, so that we can find that common ground where Saskatchewan industries and people are really feeling respected within the nation of Canada, and that hasn't always been the case over the last decade.
I might have missed this earlier, but sorry. How are you feeling just after that meeting with the Prime Minister and the Premiers?
Good. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling good too. What's making you feel that way, though?
I think it was, I think largely, one, I appreciated the debrief after the meeting yesterday. That doesn't always happen. Two, so that communication is good. Two, I was pleased with how the meeting went yesterday. I know, Prime Minister Carney had said don't expect white smoke coming out of the White House. I think many Canadians were happy that there wasn't black smoke coming out of the White House.
That's right.
And I think it sets, the positive tone to the meeting. I would hope sets the framework and the ground level for being able to build on that with the negotiations that will happen over the course of the next number of weeks and months.
Okay, so that's Scott Moe, Premier of Saskatchewan. Let's go back to here.
From Carney, of how to tell your citizens how it's going to go down rather than listening to them. Remember we talked about it last week. Moe says, Premier of Saskatchewan, Moe says he's Canadian but wouldn't stop vote on Saskatchewan separating from Canada as more separation sentiments are building in Saskatchewan as well. As I said, a national unity crisis you've yet never seen. It's happening more and more every day. Why is Mark Carney becoming so centrist all of a sudden? When all of his books, his media appearances, his conversations, things that have been recorded over time fly in the face of the centrist position he's taken? Well, it's because he knows he's got nothing if the country falls apart. So he's going to try and placate.
Trying to placate? It's just business, buddy. He's doing his job the way it needs to be done to make things better for Canadians. And that's represented in what you've seen with Scott Moe's press briefing of yesterday. You're showing Canadian Press article of May 1.
In a minority government. He's trying to take all the guns away from the Conservative Party, figuratively and literally. I thought that was kind of funny. And this is the plan. Drum up a good enough sentiment among the people. Make them think that you're centrist. Make them think that you're essentially Polyev without being Polyev. And then when you get them, call an election, majority government comes in, and then he actually institutes all the things he's been wanting to institute. That is the long-term plan and something you have to keep an eye out on. Politics is changing with Carney in the fray. I know we're used to politicians being so flagrant and out in the open with what they want to do and how, and the ridiculous measures they want to use against the population. And we've seen Mark Carney do those things in previous media appearances, but now he's prime minister. Now he's got an extra huge magnifying glass on him, and he knows what's at stake. He can't institute his ideas, his net zero agenda, if there's no country to apply it to. So he's got to placate. He's going to play the long game, and he's going to get everyone's guards down. And it's incumbent upon us to continue to inform people that is the overall plan. People don't just change overnight, and that is the warning. That is the warning, and that's what my point here is. Saskatchewan thinking about separation, and the NDP in Saskatchewan wants to bring in a bill, wants to bring in a law that prevents this idea from even happening. These people are insufferable. Mo said it here, the same as Danielle Smith said. I don't support us separating. However, I will listen to what the people want if that is what they want. And the NDP are like, well, I don't really care what the people want. We're going to tell them that that's not allowed. And that's what they're looking to push. Saskatchewan NDP to introduce anti-separation bill that aims to amend rules. Saskatchewan's opposition NDP is planning to introduce legislation to amend referendum and plebiscite rules in an effort to hold Premier Scott Moe's feet to the fire around talks of separation. Leader Carla Beck's bill, the Referendum and Plebiscite Keep Saskatchewan in Canada Amendment Act, will be put to legislators on Wednesday.
Josh, what you don't understand is in BC, Alberta, Manitoba, a lot of the lands are crown lands. And then you got indigenous treaties that supersede any provincial governments. And another thing you're forgetting about, originally Canada, back in the days of Queen Victoria, a guy like Cartier represented the French. George Brown represented the English. He brought in John A. Macdonald in order to meet Queen Victoria's representative in Bytown. They're worried about Kingston being overrun by the Americans, because that's where the capital was at the time. And they agreed to the Constitution, to create a Constitution, Dominion of Canada. I know that's hard to understand. Lower Canada was Quebec. Upper Canada was Ontario, etc., etc. So that was how Canada started. So Quebec goes back to, it could have been a war between the British and the French, and they were trying to avoid that, because that's where it was going. And that's why we had the Dominion of Canada in Bytown. Bytown, a.k.a. Ottawa. So there's the history. So we're just going to listen to you for just one more minute, then I'm going to shut you down, because I've had enough.
The opposition could not provide details as the legislation was not yet before the Assembly. The bill comes as New Democrats accuse Moe's Saskatchewan Party government of pandering to separatist sentiments following Prime Minister Mark Carney's election win for the Liberals. This is the difference between progressives and the Conservatives, right? One is allowing people to have their say. The other is telling people what their say is going to be and not giving them the option to exercise their rights. This is how they operate. This is what they do. So you want to separate. You feel like your last thing you can do is separate. And the government says, no, you're not allowed to even think about that. You're not allowed to even explore that. Not going to happen. Get used to it. Okay. Then you wonder how hot civil war happens in a country. I don't know what else to tell you. If you don't tamper down the emotions, if you don't hear people out,
cite
then
violence
they're going to be on
now.
your front door.
Holy
and
moly.
they're going to be fighting, as we're witnessing consistently, as we witnessed with Israel and Hamas. And this was something that was very interesting from the Black Box Reporter. The Heritage Department of the Government of Canada paid a consultant 6 figures to track Twitter and Facebook posts by Friends of Israel. Access to information records show. The surveillance followed Hamas terrorists' October 7th, 2023 killing and kidnapping of Jews in Israel, including 8 Canadians. The project was aimed at assessing the impact of the Israel-Hamas conflict on the online landscape of extremism, hate, and disinformation in Canada, said a project summary. Social media monitors focused on right-wing responses to the conflict and prominent news sources, it said. Tracking criticism of then Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was a priority, said the project summary, digital analysis, situation room, and rapid response programming for Israel-Gaza extremism, hate, and misinformation. The Department of Canadian Heritage paid $128,000 for 6 months' worth of work of 6 months worth of social media monitoring by the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, a consultant headquartered in the United Kingdom. And this is what they came to. Canadian Heritage concluded there was an anti-immigration sentiment because they opposed death to Jews at rallies. Because people came out of the woodwork and says, hey, how about you stop saying death to Jews? They then concluded that there's anti-immigration sentiment in the country now because you dare speak out against the protests, which then some turned into
we got extra
riots.
news.
That is the Canada we have. Canada we're going to continue to get under Mark Carney, no matter how long he tries to dissipate it, no matter how long he tries to dampen it and try to get through this time of turbulence.
Listen, you don't even know anything about British Palestine. That's what it was called before it became Israel and Gaza. 1947. Guy by the name of Wiseman, Deputy Minister Sokolov, because Einstein refused the task. He thought it was just friggin' nonsense. The demographics of the people back in 1947. You know, it was British Palestine before it became Israel and Gaza. Less than 10% of the population was Jewish. 90% was Arab. Like, there's a lot more there than what you understand. It's been set up for failure, the way it's been dealt with, and various other factors we're not going to go into here. But any death on either side is no good. Death, period. The day of the Darwinian ideology of survival of the fittest, what you have to understand, we are human beings. We're not animals. Start living like human beings, treating people like human beings, everybody with dignity, because everybody has value and worth. So I'm going to end with that. Love and peace to everybody. Take care. Talk to you all soon. Questions, comments, throw in the comments section. Thank you.